Now, this is a kind of a tricky time of the day because you all just had lunch and you may have the strong instinct or desire to take a nap, but I would tell you that despite what my colleague Ruth Benka, Chair of Psychiatry, would say, this is not the time to sleep. You can sleep on your own time when you get home. We've got a very, very exciting program coming up, and to kick it off, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Dean Stephen Barker, to come up and introduce the program.
I promise you, we are not going to let you sleep. So, as Mike says, I'm the Dean of the School of the Arts, and we've been talking for a while about this incredible opportunity to be part of what's now in the process of being launched. It's certainly one of the great initiatives of the campus. And by the way, I do have a PowerPoint, but since this is an arts presentation, you have to imagine it. So, when you see the slides flip, you can enjoy. The Trevor School of the Arts, of which I have the deep honor of being the dean, is, we claim, UCI's creative research engine. And what that means is that we play our own particular role in what today is being referred to as the moonshot. And to adapt to the language we're using today, the Claire Trevor School of the Arts is the Claire Trevor School of Rocket Fuel. And so what we are hoping to be able to do, what we are planning to be able to do with regard to the 4 pillars of the great UCI Brain initiative is to provide literally the fuel for connectivity, the fuel for the kinds of cross-disciplinary dialogue that Michael and others, all others, talked about this morning and will talk about for the remainder of the day. Our research takes place in the School of the Arts on campus and off in a series of laboratories. I want to be using familiar language to you all. Our laboratories consist of studios, stages, concert halls, galleries, classrooms. They investigate, without exception, the nature of the human experience, and we do it in 2 ways. One, we explore human experience in its most immediate state. That is to say, at the level of the senses, at the level of affect, at the level of intuition, at the level of the reception, literally, of stimuli in music, dance, drama, and art. Second, we explore the nature of human experience in its more considered form in our 3 PhD programs, in the MFA programs that require thesis activity, that is to say, with levels of critique, of theory, of criticism that are an essential part of the framework around art making. And so the challenge we face is to prevent the seductive latter one of those 2 ways in which we explore human experience, that is to say, the considered one, from eclipsing the former. You have to look for art in the realm of the pre-rational before you decide what it means. And so we try to explore both of those areas before reaching the threshold of consciousness and after reaching the threshold of consciousness. And before we leave the moonshot metaphor, I want to make 2 very, very quick points here. First of all, don't ignore in the moonshot metaphor the reference to lunacy. Because art is all about provocation, it's all about being transported, what for a couple of thousand years was referred to as the sublime. And so quite apart from the notion of rational discourse, one of the things we're about is that kind of lunacy. That is to say, truly transporting experience. Whether you're looking at a painting, listening to a piece of Mozart, coming to Stephen Sondheim's Company, which is now being performed in the Barclay Theater, whatever you may experience in the arts, the effort is to give you a transformational experience. And second of all, remember the reference that Pramod Karganikar made this morning. that our current study of the brain, according to President Obama, is like listening to the string section without hearing the whole orchestra. Notice the metaphor that Pramod turned to in talking about the relationship between study of the brain and understanding the whole brain. It's not only a musical metaphor, but it's also, at fundamental levels, a metaphor. That is to say, it's a cross-association with a big gap in the middle. And arts take place in that associational world where the energy of connectivity actually is always at work. Another element of what you saw this morning, the normal STEM strategy is idea, you saw the light bulb with idea inside it, idea leading to discovery. But what you get when you add the A to STEM is that the arts bring you the opportunity, should you choose to take it, to reverse that trajectory. That is to say, creativity equals discovery that leads to ideas. We do the work first, and then we think about all of the implications of that work. It's a different approach to the whole notion of research. And so that's one of the many things that we as a School of the Arts can contribute to UCI Brain. We take that idea of being part of the strategies adopted within this amazing new initiative very, very seriously. So the artistic brain is, I would suggest to you, the connected brain. Our particular dance in the arts leaps across all four of the legs of the brain initiative through what I like to call metadisciplinarity, a certain kind of floating connection that transcends even interdisciplinary work. We want to create new connections and new kinds of connectivity, and that's what the arts is all about. And, of course, we would love, over the course of time, beginning today, where we haven't already done it, to work with you. And so now let me introduce the man who's going to take you into a couple of the ways in which the arts are part of the Brain Initiative. John Crawford is the Claire Trevor School of the Arts Associate Dean for Interdisciplinary Initiatives. He is also the director of the School of the Arts Institute for 21st Century Creativity and is also leading a nascent area in the School of the Arts, the Emergent Media and Design Initiative, which will have many implications for the work of everyone in the room. John Crawford.
Thanks. Thank you, Dean Barker. That was him. This is me. And my job is really simply to be an MC and kind of tie together some of the threads that you're going to be seeing today. One of the things I want to do is provide a little context. 50 years ago, when UCI originated, in the School of the Arts, we originated these four different departments. As soon as UCI had departments, after all, it was the 60s. And once we had departments, we ended up with a department of dance, a department of drama, a department of music, and a department of visual arts. Those are the only four departments in the UC system that use the conservatory model within the academy. In other words, the students and the faculty in these departments are studying their particular practice, their particular way of expressing in the most focused way possible, but at the same time are connecting out to the academy. So, end of history lesson, here we are in 2019. What we're doing now is saying, well, in addition to having these four unique areas, let's see if we can find a way to make some of the connections that Dean Barker had mentioned, and that's really what the Emergent Media and Design Initiative is all about. It actually has some history going back. 20 years ago, UCI founded the Beal Center for Art and Technology, funded with support from the Rockwell Corporation and named in the honor of Don and Joan Beal. Also, of course, the leading lights behind the Applied Innovations Initiative and many other wonderful activities here at UCI. But for 20 years, the Beal Center has been making these connections between art and technology. We, 3 years ago, through the support of the Office of Research, founded the Institute for 21st Century Creativity. And not to say that 20th century creativity had anything wrong with it, but we found that we could focus our efforts on making connections in a new way by connecting technology, the arts, sciences, engineering, humanistic inquiry in ways that really are only possible at a place like UCI, a comprehensive university with a really future-oriented vision to evolving what education might be. Very soon, we'll be on evolving some new programs. We're going to have a minor in Emergent Media and Design, which is in the proposal process now. We're hoping to have a major in that area sometime soon, so stay tuned for those developments. But in the meantime, while the proposals are going in, we don't want to stand still, and that's why we were so excited when we heard about what might be possible with the idea of the artistic brain thread in the UCI Brain initiative. And so what we're going to do today is show you some of the things that have been going on at UCI that, while not exactly part of the Brain Initiative yet themselves, we see as starting off points, jumping off points for the kinds of collaboration that we want to do. So really, we're here to say, here are some possibilities. We're really interested in your thoughts and ideas about potential for collaboration. We'll be exploring that more over time with the help of Mike and his team. So with that, what I'd like to do next is give you a quick introduction to a very fascinating project that actually premiered at our Beal Center for Art and Technology back in 2003. The Beal Center for Art and Technology is a gallery. It's a white box gallery, not really a great theater space, but the creators of that project did amazing work to create something that you'll hear more about in a minute. Very recently, through the Institute for 21st Century Creativity, we were able to facilitate these creators to make a new version of Reading Frankenstein, addressing some more contemporary concerns. So with that, I'd like to introduce the three creators of Reading Frankenstein, Annie Loui, Antoinette Lafarge, and Jim Fallon. You'll be hearing more about their co-creators in a minute. Annie.
Thanks, John. Hi, there are people here. As John said, I'm Annie Loui. I'm a professor in the drama department. I run the movement work for the graduate acting program. And I also have a company called Counterbalance Theater that is devoted to devising physical theater based on great literature. Did something just switch all of a sudden? Uh-oh. I'm going to let John do that.
Keep talking while I try
Okay,
to do
I'll
so.
keep talking. Anyway, in 2003, I decided to go across the sidewalk to a colleague in the studio art department and say, I want to do a collaboration with you. I know I want to do it about reading. And she said, that's a really strange idea as a basis for a piece of art. And I said, I know. I don't know quite what this means yet. So we had a long talk. Antoinette Lafarge, being a very clever person, we chatted things through for a bit and decided, okay, let's find a book that will be kind of the emblem of a research into the vicarious nature of reading. What happens when you read? I read voraciously as a child and am completely convinced that I go into the place of the book when I read. It's something I do. So Antoinette and I talked about this and we decided, we need somebody in cognitive science to work with us. So we went across the bridge this time, went to cognitive science, and they said, you need to talk to Jim Fallon, who's not really in cognitive science, but he is the man who knows everything. So at that point, I believe you were in neurobiology, yes? Okay. And we had a long talk about this vicarious nature of reading and ultimately what that would mean. So we decided, Antoinette said, no, that's not really enough because I'm also interested in updating the story. We decided to work with Frankenstein, being a brilliant novel. She said, great, 2 characters, this will be great, but I think that it needs to be an update of Frankenstein, and I'm interested in AIs. So somehow he needed to cobble together the idea of working with artificial life forms and also working with this idea of Frankenstein, which was pretty simple. So the scientist becomes a modernized scientist who's working with artificial life. Okay, that was in 2003. So Antoinette and Jim and I worked together, developed our project. It went up in 2 different workshops, and we decided in the end that it was a little bit before its time. So through the years, we've talked more and more about this since the advent of CRISPR, since the advent of more different kinds of technology that we could use for this project. We decided that it was time to come back to the project. Oddly, Jim, Antoinette, and I are all still here, still talking to each other. We found our original lighting designer, who is also here and worked with us, and we did Reading Frankenstein 2019. And with that, I'm going to let Antoinette pick up.
Hi. It's always fun to use a computer you're not used to. So I worked, Annie and I co-wrote this, the script. Annie's the director, as you heard, working with people, something I don't do well. I did the projection design for both versions in close consultation with Annie and the lighting designer, because we decided early on we were going to have it lit largely with projections. And Lonnie Alcaraz up there is our lighting designer. So the first version in 2002, the creature, we thought, it was essentially, we made a kind of speculative fiction out of it. The creature is primarily a software AI using a substrate of neurological tissue, so there's a very small biological basis there. Turned out to be a very capable AI, big on self-learning, big on expanding its capacity, so we were able to give it more powers as the piece progressed, and eventually, we never brought it into physical reality in that piece. In the end, this is the last scene on the left. We had the creature virtually coming in through projections for the whole piece on the left. On the right, as you can see, that's the last scene is set in a text-based virtual world, which as you know, many of you know, date back to the 90s. It was already old tech then, but it was an idea that a lot of people weren't really very conversant with. We kept this idea of the importance of reading, vicarious experience, and the strange nature of text as experience in the piece, so that we use text in a lot of different ways. Text was an environment that the creature was in. Text was an environment that Mary Shelly was in. Text was part of the narrative. Here you see part of the book unscrolling on the screen, being kind of written in real time as the creature and Mary have a dialogue, and it's also completely abstracted, so it becomes image and moves away from language. As part of our research process, we decided to do brain scans of Annie. Jim Fallon organized that for us, so that we could get actually some data on reading that we could then incorporate in the piece in various ways. And so this is some of the visual images, visual materials. These are samples of what we got back of the brain in a resting state, reading a blank page, right? Reading a picture, and then reading language, a script, so that you have kind of differentiations of the brain states in all of those. We use these images in both versions of Reading Frankenstein. Another thing that we had was through a different lab here, Dr. Kottman's lab, we got hold of some sound, a sound piece that was a sonification of rat brain slices that had been kept alive in a petri dish, and the electrical activity was transmuted into sound. And we used that as a sound, part of the soundtrack of the piece. I'm hoping that this can be heard, but I'm guessing that the sound may be too, I don't hear the sound coming through, although we did hear it coming through earlier. So I'm not sure what's going on, why the sound's not coming through. However, it's not the most important thing, and I can play it for you guys later if anybody's interested off my laptop. That's a rat brain slice there. We use this rat brain image in the latest Frankenstein. And we use an assortment of other kinds of images that come from the world of the brain, from neurons to sort of metaphorical ideas about mind. The problem is that, as with any speculative fiction or science fiction project, we're doing a lot of hand-waving around the science because we're pushing it out into the future and we're imagining stuff that may not ever be possible in order to create a story, a certain kind of a story. Jim was fantastic in both versions of this piece in helping us keep the science fiction somewhat tethered to reality. If the more untethered it is, the more it's my fault, I will admit right away. And so there's several scenes in the piece where science is talked about to the audience, and so we were trying to support it with images that wouldn't be just like a lecture where you have to learn a bunch of stuff because there's a test on Tuesday, but to be able to help people be in the space where they can think about brain science and then later on genetic engineering science. One thing we used that was really in both versions of the piece is this, one of the engineered creatures had a structure like a brain, and we used this a quite wonderful brain animation, which I'll skip ahead on, as part of our scenic design. You can see in the 2003 version behind our then Mary, and you can see it here from just a couple weeks ago, taking up the entire stage and bathing our new Mary in its light. So we used it for spatialization as well as lighting and kind of to give an idea of a kind of a structure. And then in this version, we had to rewrite the script greatly, as Annie said. And our new creature is an advanced biocomputer or bio-based neural network designed more extensively on human tissue substrates, we talk a lot in the piece about CRISPR and related technologies. It turns out, again, to be strong at self-learning. It has exceptional adaptive ability, and we imagine that it manages to kind of continually cobble itself together and recreate itself to the point where we actually physicalize it about halfway through the piece. It appears on stage very suddenly in a very dramatic scene. This is where early in the scene it's in the computers, just like in the first version, but by halfway through we have the creature on stage, much to the scientist's surprise. Because he actually has figured out how to take human form. And again, these pictures are all from the 2019 piece, which we did just at the beginning of November. And we can see we're using text again in a lot of different ways. We're using, the creature is in the text. Here's excerpts from Mary Shelley's own script of the original Frankenstein, so that's appearing. We have text creating surround environments. And this collection of triangles that looks like abstract art on the upper right is actually an alphabet that I created. That's actually language, although it doesn't look like language, so you have language in encoded form in this piece as well. And now I turn it back over to Annie to talk more about the 2019 version.
Reading Frankenstein.
Welcome back to UCI's Biological Psychiatry Center and the Questions of Creation, Questions of Perception seminar. So close your textbooks and open your minds. Today we turn our attention to the perennially elusive question of creation. Now, we know we can program neural nets into a computer.
I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted.
It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs.
A strange multiplicity of sensations seized me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelt at the same time. When you created me, we were destined for a great enterprise.
There are boundary conditions. The DNA exons are not fully stable. I'm gonna erase you and reset from the backup.
A pox on your boundaries and your slipshod architecture. Give me the opportunity and I will be virtuous.
And in a pretty short time, literally, it can read your mind and your feelings. And at that point,
So I dreamed my monster got away from me, and he wandered all alone in the wood, howling like a wild beast. The whole world is at rest except this monster.
What hath night to do with sleep?
He's locked me out of my lab, and I don't know how to get back in.
do I relieve thee, my creator? Every 3 minutes, I can merge with my ancestors, the fastest mutating organisms on Earth. These are the life forms that will win. They will take over and set the next wave of life going on and on. Here, in the ice, is the algae waking up to the warmth. Waking up in me, the earth sleeps for billions of years, and when conditions are right, things come away. The world is alive. It's alive.
So really an amazing production. For those of you who didn't get a chance to see it, it really missed something wonderful. But there's a few points I'd like to just make about what you've heard already. The Reading Frankenstein project, as you've just heard, was a combination of process and product. It had these notions of discovery, of research being essentially what we're doing when we don't know what we're doing. That approach where we are investigating, discovering. Another way of thinking of it is that art has the potential of helping us discover the real problems, focusing on the problems rather than just the solutions. We have many, many, many solutions in a scientifically strong institution like UCI, but sometimes we wonder if we're really focusing on the right problems, and that's really, I think, where art comes in a very meaningful way. I'd like to introduce Professor James Fallon, who is a luminary, and many of you know already, was very involved in the production of Reading Frankenstein in both versions, and he's going to speak for a few minutes. Jim.
Yeah, thanks. I guess one question is why a basic scientist, a neuroscientist, would get involved with artists. I mean, this would be, why do this? And I'm here just to pitch that. I was, from the time I can remember, I always wanted to be a biologist, but I saw a movie in 1968 when I was in college that said, aha, it's all about neurobiology. And since that time, I kind of got the idea, and it's been reinforced many times, is that artists know what's important. They just don't know how anything works. And whereas scientists kind of try to know how things work, but they don't know what's important. And by putting these together, one can come up with something very interesting. Now, my first research was back in 1972 was on synesthesia. It was on the cellular basis in monkey frontal lobe, temporal lobe, on how visual, auditory, somatosensory information is synthesized in neurons at a cellular level. So that was, I came at this kind of honestly. I didn't know what I was doing, but I mean, nonetheless, the spark was there. And it was, in the 90s, we got involved with analyzing artworks. So what we did was took people with schizophrenia and different psychiatric disorders, compared them to normals. The artworks of these different people have been both, really studied and categorized or not, and used fast Fourier transformations to look at spatial frequencies within the artworks, and we're able to distinguish between schizophrenics and not, people with, and it was really wild. And you can also do this with music, and you can go back and forth just in this synthetic and synesthetic way. So it's always been kind of very interesting. The question is, where do you get money to study this? And can you do it? Who has the resources to do it? Because it's fun stuff, but it's not the disease itself. So this is always a challenge. But now if you get the right team, and there's a good time for this, where you can form the fusion of these things in a very sensible way and quantify it and using some computational, not tricks, but computational work, and also codify it in VR. In the past 10 years, I've been working with the Vatican Art and Technology Council because of the interest in trying to project real empathy, that is emotional empathy. That's what the present Pope is really interested in. But on the other side, I've also looked at this, I've been working with the military, with the Pentagon, with James Mattis's committee on not how to improve war, but how to make it humane, as it were, and exploring empathy. And these are techniques that are really about the arts, because a lot of this stuff is undefined. But can you define it? And for basic scientists who can take imaging, genomic and genetic approaches, psychometric approaches, psychiatric and psychological, but cognitive approaches where you can take the ideas of embodiment, artistic embodiment, and quantify it enough so you can say, well, here are the trigger features. These are the ways that this can work. This is how it's happening, and therefore it makes it very teachable and makes it accessible to the world, as it were. So it's a great teaching thing. So I think that this idea that you have of bringing it together is very timely, because even though people have thought about these things, right? Can you get the horses together, and can you get the resources? So I think what you're doing is great, but it wasn't just that, because when you get two really smart, really creative, and really fun women walk into your office and say, we got an idea, we got a crackpot idea, and finding a way to speak to each other about it was so great, really wonderful, and I'd keep coming back for more, because it's important work, what they're doing, and to be involved in it is really quite an honor. So thanks, Annie and Anto, and thanks for,
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks, Dr. Jim Fallon. Well, the next group is setting up. I had a couple of comments. First of all, building off of Jim's excellent point about embodiment. And, we think of the brain as being this, lump of tissue inside our skulls. But, really, of course, as many of you know much better than me, the brain is not limited to that. The spinal cord really is, an extension of the brain, isn't it? The entire neurological system has all this connectivity. And where is the boundary? Why do we have to say that the brain stops at the head? That is the notion behind the whole field of embodied cognition, where what we're doing with embodied cognition is trying to find ways that we can study all of this in a more detailed way and also in a more expansive way. You're going to see in a minute the work of a group of students that has been mentored by Dave Ihrig, our guest instructor, and Lisa Noggle, professor in the dance department. Here's the names of the students. We'll put these up again at the end, and you can see their work as well, because Dave needs to change over with the HDMI cable onto his computer so we can show you something else in a minute. I wanted to also refer back to something that was talked about this morning at some length, the wonderful way that the UCI Brain initiative is connecting in with the whole team science initiative at UCI, which is super important and really, I think, one of the areas that is going to differentiate UCI from our peer institutions, in the sense that we have some of the people in the world who are the strongest in this field that used to be called maybe computer-supported collaborative work. Really now team science seems to be the buzzword. We've been discussing, because there's something that bugs me a little bit about this notion of team science, is that teams can actually include broader ranges of people. You're all familiar with the notion of putting A into STEM to create STEAM, which obviously is crucially important. But really, we need to find ways that this notion of team science can, expand a bit more broadly. Dean Barker talked about this notion of the sublime. And so, I kind of think like maybe team sublime might be a good way. Team sublimity is another possibility. I know it has to be an S to fit into the acronym. So that's a task for all of us to think about, is the ways that this notion of team science, which has a really great foundation, can be expanded to include other kinds of scholarship, artistic production, and exploration. So, Dave, how much longer do I have to vamp here?
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. You want me to vamp for a minute, and then do you have your headset? Are you ready to go?
It was here.
Yeah, okay, so how about, may I vamp for 2 minutes? Please. And could we find his headset, because I think it was taken. So, yeah, so you're about to see what I think the artistic brain is today. And you might say, so what's the artistic brain? What has it done, and what does it plan to do? And I'd like to share what I hope it does. I'll tell you what we have done so far. So in 2017, a community member said, hey, what happens in the brain of an actor? And because I was studying the subject at the time, I was offered the opportunity to teach the Science of Acting class in the fall of 2017, in which the Claire Trevor School of the Arts collaborated with the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory. I met the great director, Michael Yassa, who provided some of the greatest researchers to come in and explain about the components of our nervous systems and brain function and how they apply to the arts that we were creating. At that time, it was for actors. And I'd like to share with you now the magic formula for collaboration moving forward for all of you. It's really simple. You provide the artist with the foundation on how their brain functions, and then you say, now, what would you like to explore in relation to the way you create your craft? And they will come up with some excellent questions, and that brings us to today. But before we come to today, because what you're about to see, by the way, has never been done before in the history of mankind. You're about to see the very first performance that captures neurological data from the audience in real time during the performance. Is it a good idea? I don't know. Deeb's on the hot button. But, so having said that, the Science of Acting class was extremely fruitful. I could talk about that for hours. The number of discoveries that came out of that were seriously beyond my expectations. It bred another idea. If we could use a brain-based approach to acting and make acting a more streamlined, efficient, effective process, could we do the same thing for creating stories? And so then we did, Michael Yassa and I collaborated with an executive producer from Disney and a script consultant from Hollywood, and we did a Why Our Brains Love Story presentation. The audience then came up with a situation of a play, and then we actually created a UCI drama student wrote what I'm calling the first ever neuroscientifically designed one-act play. We streamlined story development. Yes, studios, you can call me. So we had this fantastic results with these students who are really accelerating their learning curves in their arts. And here comes John Crawford and says, yes, I will help you do a presentation for this event. And so we have now the Arts 199 class. It consists of dancers, musicians, actors, and who am I missing? And a visual artist. And all of them have applied this same formula. So moving forward, like they say, this is a winning proposition. Training artists to better understand their own nervous system and the functions and components of how they create their art from a neurobiological perspective, and then allowing them to experiment in any way they can. That's what you're about to see right now. So with no further ado, I'm going to bring up Adib, and I'm going to attempt to get my technology to work. I make no promises. You may go, yes.
Hello everyone, I'm Adib, this one. And I'm a pianist, actor, and composer. And I'm a graduate student here in the music department in a PhD program called ICIT, Integrated Composition, Improvisation, and Technology. So what I'm going to do with the sensors is to survey the neural activity of the audience in two different performances. First one is where you're passive, you just sit and enjoy. And the second one, I want to make you a little bit uncomfortable. You should stand up whenever I told you, and we will do a little improv together. So from the beginning of this project, as I was composing this piece for this event, I was also thinking about and guessing the neural activity of the audience. I was just drawing imaginary things. And I want to see right now if the things that I guessed was true or not. And if it's true, it kind of helps me know the techniques, the patterns, the tempos that kind of engages the audience better and kind of helps me guess or manage the engagement level of the audience. So let me open up with a really short improvisation on the piano.
Do you want to turn up your mic? You need to flip it on. Take it. So just on that.
Do you need to switch over?
Too loud or is it too soft? Keep it really short. So the next one. I created this improvisation game about 6-7 years ago when I had my first improvisation workshop. And I called it Tuptishta. So there is an imaginary set of drums right in front of me. There's a snare drum here. Can you see it? What color is it? Red. Red. Red? White. White. Okay. So when I hit it, it says, can you say it with me? When I hit it. Can you please stand up? I hit it once. Okay, there's another one here, which is a little bit smaller. Can you see this one? Okay, when I hit it, it says, wow. Okay, there's a little shiny symbol right here on my left, but when I hit it, it says, can you say that? So it's nice. Okay. It's two. D.
Now, hold on, Adib. So do we really want to do the experiment now? Because now everybody sit down and play 30 seconds of a song. Just play 30 seconds of anything. Bring it home. We just completed the first ever live demonstration while capturing audience response. Thank you, Adib. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I'd like for you now to ask the students. Let's put our students back up on here. Thank you, sir. And let's have the students come up. Actually, one at a time, just come up and tell them what you studied and what you found and what you hope to use it for. So, Alexis, you're always first. Come on. So, Alexis, by the way, on the way in, if you saw those two very large framed paintings, how many people, if you saw that, raise your hand. Okay, great. So Alexis was the creator. And Alexis, tell them why you created those.
Well, I created those artworks because I wanted to see if there was a correlation between when an artist creates an artwork, if they're emotionally resonating with that artwork, versus when a viewer is viewing said artwork and they're emotionally resonating with that as well. So throughout the experiment, I measured my own immersion rates throughout 2 artworks that I created, making sure that they were both relatively the same, except varying in techniques as I was creating them. And then I showed both artworks to groups of people and put sensors on them to test their own immersion rates. And then I compared the results to each other. And what I found was that my own emotional resonance with the artworks actually did not match the people who were viewing the artworks. I believe this is probably because I resonated with the second artwork, and that was probably because of repetition. So I was able to connect with that more just because I was doing it over again. But with the people viewing the artwork, I believe that they resonated with that one more because the brush strokes and the techniques in that one were a lot more visible. It was not as soft as the second one. And because of that, I think that the technique, when it's incredibly varied on an artwork, people are able to resonate with that artwork emotionally than softer ones. And
yeah, good, awesome, great, yeah, great. Okay, and next speaker, and by the way, Marilla, come on, next step, I don't care, come on up, Paula. So just so you know, the Immersion neurology measurement is a combination of emotional resonance and attention for the brain, okay? So it's what turns the brain on, okay? And this is Pallavi, and tell them what you did.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pallavi. I am an actor. And my experiment was basically checking efficiency for actors in rehearsal. So as David just mentioned, immersion is basically the combination of attention and emotional resonance. So that means your brain is paying attention to the event, and it's also going to be staying with you for a long time. For actors, that feels like kind of what we're aiming for in every one of our rehearsals, because that's what we want ideally. We want to be paying attention to our work, we want to be paying attention to the text, but we also want to make sure that whatever discoveries we make are staying with us into the next rehearsal and into performance. So I was curious to kind of compare the more traditional method that we are taught, which is repetition, to some of the exercises and some of the more non-traditional methods that I've been learning in a lot of my acting classes. So I had 2 actors come in and perform and measured their immersion for 2 separate monologues that they did. And so for the first monologue, I took their initial readings and then I gave them 20 minutes to just prepare on their own just by repeating the monologue. And then I took their immersion again. But for the second monologue, after taking the initial reading, what I had them do was spend the same amount of time doing 3 specific exercises. And those exercises were a mapping the environment exercise, where we had them close their eyes and visualize the environment in which their character was in based on like a narration of that environment. We also had them do an improv exercise in which I would ask them questions and they would have to respond as their character. And finally, we had them do a physical warm-up just to like loosen up their muscles. And then I took their reading again. And for one of the participants, I was also able to get a reading on both of those monologues 1 week later after working on the monologues for a week. So what I found was that there was a very slight increase in immersion, regardless of what kind of practice was done. And I also found that for the other participant, her second reading of each monologue had a higher immersion than her first reading of each monologue. However, what was really interesting is these sensors that some of you are wearing also measure what's called psychological safety, which is how safe a person feels taking risks or expressing themselves in an environment. And for both of these participants, some of them felt safety sometimes and some felt unsafe during the actual reading of the monologues. But when we were doing the exercises, so the improv, the mapping the environment, and the physical warm-up, both of their readings were very safe, which I thought was extremely interesting because for some reason doing those exercises, they felt more comfortable taking risks than when actually acting. So I think the next step would be how to kind of transfer that over.
Nice. Okay, and Katie Pierce is a dancer, and tell them what you did in 1 minute. We have 1 minute so they can ask us questions.
Hello, my name is Katie Pierce. I'm in the dance department here. So my experiment, I choreographed a dance with no music. And then I also did a set of improvisation without any music, with music. And I did that on purpose so that the music could influence my movement. And I wanted to test if my immersion levels would be higher if I did have a set of choreography or if I was just improvising and it was really just coming from me and whatever I was feeling in the moment. And it ended up being that the set of choreography, my immersion levels were much higher. And I concluded that that was due to me feeling, as Paula V just talked about, the psychological safety, right? I concluded that that was because I probably felt more comfortable and safe in an environment where I felt really comfortable with the choreography I knew, and I felt that I could show much more emotion in that setting. So yeah, I hope to continue to use this, and in the future, I hope to get so comfortable with improvisation that my immersion levels are just as high with a set of choreography. Thank you. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Damasco. I'm a graduate student and pursuing my MFA in dance. Just a little background story or just information. My current research and thesis is called ebb and flow work. And what I'm interested in is how to develop a movement language that will allow dancers to be more active and confident actually dancing on the floor. So believe it or not, throughout my 10 years of dancing professionally and teaching, for some reason there's still some hesitancy when it comes to like actually dancing on the floor, all right? And so what I tested, I created this movement language. I tested it on myself and a cohort of mine. And I wanted to see the different immersion levels of doing the exact same movement vocabulary. Obviously, myself, I was more fluent in it because I invented it, basically. But also, my cohort was starting to learn to it. And so my hypothesis, my initial hypothesis was that my immersion levels would be actually lower because I was fluent in the language, meaning that it was second nature, that I didn't have to think about it. And so I thought that my cohort would have a higher immersion level because she would have to really focus on the phrase work, the actual movement, and the physicality of it. Turns out I was wrong. I'm usually wrong with a lot of things, but I had the most higher immersion levels, and I think the obvious and the clear answer is that I love dancing on the floor. Not because I'm so close to it, because I'm short joke, but I find home in the floor, where my cohort was more of a ballet dancer, and which is more lifted and ethereal towards the sky. And so what I want to what I can use that data for is actually, as a choreographer and designer, I could actually pinpoint the exact moment of doing the language where she was most immersed. And so as a choreographer, I could streamline a lot of different movements that were highly immersed so that I could choreograph a whole piece that is just highly immersive. So that's what I plan to do. Thank you.
I thought for sure you do a roll off or something.
All right, hello. I'm the last one. My name is August Manzanares. I'm on this side. Cool. All right, so my project, it was on testing the signature. What was it, right? The neurological signature. Sorry about that. So what I did was, as a musician, I made two different pieces, one that was more complex and one that was more simple. The simple one meaning it's a simple melody you can follow, and then you'd probably remember it after I played it. The more complex one, you probably need to pay attention a little more and figure it out. But what it's saying right here, it's talking about the jazz lick. That was the whole center here. The complex versus simple thing was more of a bonus. So for musicians, if you're familiar with the lick in the jazz world, basic explanation of that is it's an infamous lick that over the years, it's still not understood why, but it's just a melody that happens naturally because of your body. Like your body naturally does it without even explaining it. And then for some reason in your brain, it happens to like enjoy it more. Like, for example, when I was testing it for musicians, the more complex pieces where I included the lick, the simple one was a different melody. For musicians, they had higher immersion levels. So that begs the question, did they enjoy it because of just the lick or because it was more complex? In this case, it was the lick, so we'll just say that they enjoyed the lick more. When compared to the simple piece, they had smaller immersion levels. They spiked at smaller points. So it's like, are we just enjoying... For musicians, we just enjoy more stuff because we already like understand music. You know, we're already understanding what the heck's happening. Or for people that are not musicians, do you just enjoy a simple thing now and you're good with listening to some simplicity? Are we getting simpler or are we enjoying the complex? And that's what I was looking at.
Nice. Okay, you simple people. Okay, so you can see the effect on students. They all came up with this on their own. It's very exciting. And the idea of the artistic brain in the future having its own laboratory that has equipment like this neuroimmersion, as well as other equipment that measures physiological change, which we have already identified, could really accelerate intellectual and artistic growth in students. I've seen it already, but I think it's something to work towards, and the collaboration with the neuroscientists is a massive boost to that acceleration. One quick thank you to Paul Zach, who lent us this equipment to use, the Neuroimmersion platform, and said, yeah, go let the students learn. So thank you very much to him, and thank you very much for listening. And now, the great John Crawford.
Thanks, David, and a special thanks to our wonderful School of the Arts students for your great work. Just putting a bit of a bow on this, remember at the beginning of this session, Dean Barker talked about this notion of the theaters, the rehearsal studios, the artistic studios being our laboratories. Maybe when he said that, you didn't quite understand the depth of it, but now seeing the kinds of work that these students are doing, and more importantly, the thought processes, the emotional connections, and the physical embodied interaction with the systems that you've seen demonstrated here today, you can, I think, start to understand the great potential we feel for these kinds of connectivities and for the whole notion of the artistic brain. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I'd like to point out that all of the presenters will be available in our coffee break if you have any questions. Thanks, everybody.